The sun rose heavy and red over the endless grasslands of the African savanna, painting the world in fire and gold. A soft wind rippled through the tall grass, whispering across the ancient earth, where the footprints of creatures long vanished still slept beneath the soil. It was 4.8 million years ago, a time before history, before words, before mankind had even learned to dream of gods. Yet even then, among the scattered stones and trembling shadows, something sacred was beginning to take form: love and the will to protect it. At the edge of a rocky outcrop, a small band of early humans stirred. They were not yet fully human, not as we know today, but their eyes carried the same flicker of awareness that would someday build civilizations. They were Homo Habilis, the handy men, though they did not call themselves that. To them, life was simple and vast, measured only by the rising and setting of the sun and the beating of their hearts. The leader of this group was a male named Korak, broad-shouldered and scarred from many hunts. His mate, Asher, watched over two small children, their hair matted, their faces bright with curiosity. Around them, 5 others prepared for the day, sharpening stones, scanning the horizon, listening to the distant calls of predators. Korak crouched near a stream, dipping his hand into the cold water. His reflection trembled on the surface, a face rough with instinct, yet softened by something new. He lifted his head toward the wind and smelled danger. The herds had moved north overnight. That meant the great cats would soon follow. Protection was no longer just a need, it was a duty, carved deep into his bones. He rose and looked back at his family. Asher met his gaze, her dark eyes alert and knowing. Without a word, she understood. The day would be hard. The group moved as one across the golden plain, their bare feet pressing against the soil that would someday bear cities. They carried stones shaped into crude tools, their first weapons, proof that survival was no longer a game of chance. Korak led from the front, his senses sharp. Every rustle of grass, every cry of a distant vulture, every shift of the wind carried meaning. Behind him, Asher carried the younger child on her hip while the elder walked beside her, holding a small stick as if it were a spear. The path they followed led toward a grove of twisted acacia trees, safety, shade, and perhaps food. But the savannah did not forgive carelessness. As they neared the grove, a low rumble echoed through the ground. The grass parted like water, and from its depths emerged a saber-tooth, massive, muscles rippling beneath its spotted coat, fangs gleaming like polished ivory. Its golden eyes locked on the group, and for a heartbeat, time froze. The children whimpered. Asher a sound halfway between a human cry and an animal roar. It was not courage that drove him, but instinct, the ancient law that life must protect life. The saber-tooth lunged. Korak dodged, falling hard onto the ground as its claws raked the air above him. Asher screamed his name or something close to it and leapt forward, striking the beast's flank with a branch. Her blow was small, but it distracted the predator for just an instant. Enough. Korak seized a sharp-edged stone and slammed it against the creature's leg. Blood burst forth. The cat bellowed in pain, retreating a few paces before disappearing back into the tall grass. The silence that followed was deafening. Korak lay still, chest heaving. Asher crawled to him, trembling hands checking his arms, his chest, his face. When she found him whole, she pressed her forehead against his, a sound of relief escaping her lips, a sound older than language itself. Around them, the others watched, their fear melting into something else, awe. For the first time, they had not fled from death. They had faced it, together. That night, as the stars stretched across the black sky, the tribe gathered around a small fire made from dry sticks and the glowing embers of struck stones. Fire, their new ally, a fragile sun they could hold in their hands. The flames danced across Korak's face as he sat beside Asher, their children nestled between them. He looked out into the darkness, where the saber-tooth still roamed, and felt something stir within him, pride, yes, but also understanding. He knew, without words, that strength alone would not save them. It was unity that would keep them alive, the circle they formed, the hands that shielded the young, the eyes that watched for danger even when tired. Protection was no longer about the body, it was about the heart. As the night deepened, the sounds of the savannah echoed around them, distant howls, the rustle of unseen feet. Yet within the circle of firelight, there was peace. Asher's head rested on his shoulder, her breath warm against his skin. Their children slept, dreaming of light and safety. The others hummed softly, a rhythm born from heartbeat and memory. And there, beneath the same stars that would one day watch over pyramids and cities, Korak's people learned the first great truth of humanity: love demands courage, and courage, the will to protect. That night marked the beginning of something eternal. In the wild heart of a savage world, the spark of human devotion had been lit, fragile, flickering, but destined to outlast the very beasts that once hunted them. Dawn returned to the savannah wrapped in mist. Pale light rolled over the horizon, illuminating the scarred ground where Korak's tribe had fought for their lives the night before. The ashes of their fire still glowed faintly, a reminder that even in darkness, warmth could be born from struggle. The air smelled of rain and blood, a strange mixture of life and death that defined their world. The saber-tooth had not returned, yet its ghost lingered in every shadow. Asher woke first, her breath soft against the cool air. She rose silently, gathering stones and twigs for a new fire. Korak stirred soon after, his muscles aching but his spirit alive, sharpened by victory and purpose. In the stillness of morning, he watched his family. Asher bent over the flames, coaxing light from stone and spark. The children chased each other near the stream, laughing in short bursts that echoed across the plains. Their laughter was the sound of survival, fragile, precious. For the first time, Korak understood that protecting them was not about fighting the beasts of the wild, it was about building something lasting, a barrier between his loved ones and the chaos of the world. But how could one build walls when all you had were hands, bones, and will? The idea came to him in fragments. As the sun climbed, the tribe followed the herds toward a ridge lined with caves. The earth there was rich with stone and dry branches, and the air was filled with the calls of birds nesting in cliffs. Korak studied the land, seeing not just what was, but what could be. The caves offered protection, dark mouths of stone that could shield them from predators and storms alike. He led his tribe inside the largest one, his hand brushing against the rough walls. The air was cool, safe, and silent. For the first time since memory began, they had a home. Asher's eyes shone as she explored the cave's depths, touching its walls as though she could feel the pulse of the earth itself. The others began to gather stones to close the entrance, piling them carefully, creating the first crude barrier humanity had ever known. It was a simple act, but in it was the birth of shelter, the first defense made not by chance, but by intention. When they finished, Korak placed his hand upon the stones, and then his family's hands joined his. A mark was made, a silent promise carved into existence: we protect each other. The days that followed reshaped them. Asher taught the others to weave dry grass and leaves into mats to soften the cave floor. The hunters learned to shape their tools better, sharper stones bound to wooden shafts, creating spears that could strike from a distance. Evenings were filled with the sound of cracking stone, striking fire, and rhythmic murmurs, their first language of teamwork. When danger came again, they were ready. One afternoon, as storm clouds gathered over the savannah, the wind carried a scent Korak recognized: danger. The tribe rushed to the cave as lightning split the sky. Thunder rolled like the roar of ancient beasts, shaking the ground. The children whimpered, clutching Asher's arms. But inside their stone shelter, they were safe. The fire flickered, casting dancing shapes upon the walls, shapes that told their story without words. Korak, watching the storm through a small gap between the rocks, felt something awaken deep within his mind. The firelight on the walls reminded him of movement, of life itself. He picked up a piece of charred wood and began to draw crude figures of men, animals, and spears. Asher watched him in wonder, realizing that he was doing something beyond survival. He was remembering. The walls became their story, their proof that they had lived, fought, and loved. These markings, though simple, were sacred, the first attempt of humankind to speak to the future. That night, after the storm had passed, the tribe emerged into a world washed clean by rain. The grass shimmered under the moonlight, and the air smelled of renewal. Korak led them to a nearby grove where lightning had struck an old tree, splitting it open. From within its heart, they gathered blackened branches, the gift of fire made by the heavens themselves. They carried the embers back to their cave, learning how to keep it alive through the night, feeding it gently with dry grass and bark. It changed everything. No longer did they sleep in fear of the dark. The firelight pushed away the predators and drew them closer to one another. Asha would sit beside Korak, her head resting against his shoulder, while the others hummed softly, a rhythm of comfort that echoed through the cave. The children would trace the figures on the walls, learning their own story that once, their kind had faced the beasts and won. The bond between them grew stronger, shaped by necessity and affection. They learned to take turns watching the entrance, to warn one another of danger. When the men hunted, the women guarded the young, keeping the fire alive. When one fell ill, the others cared for them, bringing water and warmth. Slowly, instinct became empathy, a force more powerful than claws or teeth. And in that empathy lay evolution. One day, when food was scarce, Korak and two hunters followed a herd far into the plains. They found themselves near a dried riverbed, where a new kind of danger awaited, not a beast, but another tribe. These strangers were taller, leaner, with sharper tools and wary eyes. The two groups faced each other in silence, the wind heavy between them. Korak raised his hands slowly, showing he carried no weapon. The other leader did the same. Then, something miraculous happened, they shared. A carcass of a small antelope was divided, piece by piece. No words were exchanged, only nods. But that simple act planted another seed, the idea that protection could extend beyond blood, that survival could be stronger through peace. When Korak returned home, he brought not only meat but understanding. Around the fire that night, he told Asha what he had seen, not with words, but through gestures, drawings, and eyes full of meaning. She smiled, touching his face, realizing that something was changing in their kind. They were no longer just animals surviving the wild, they were becoming something more, beings who could choose compassion over conflict. As stars stretched above the savannah, the tribe slept in their cave, surrounded by walls they had built, fire they had tamed, and stories they had begun to tell. Outside, the world remained wild and merciless. But inside, a new kind of strength burned, one born not of fangs or fear, but of love and unity. And so, beneath that endless sky, humanity began to build the first invisible walls, not of stone or wood, but of care, courage, and connection. These were the walls that would one day shape empires, protect generations, and carry the flame of humankind into eternity. Seasons turned, and with them, the world itself seemed to breathe. Rains came and went like fleeting dreams, and the once green savannah turned golden and dry again. Time moved slowly, but change was constant, and in the heart of that change stood Korak's tribe, stronger and wiser than before. What had once been a scattered group of survivors was now something more profound, a family bound by trust, by memory, and by a promise to protect one another no matter what the wild demanded. Yet nature was not content to let them rest. With every gift it gave, fire, shelter, tools, it brought new tests, greater than the last. Korak sat one morning at the mouth of the cave, watching the horizon. The air shimmered with heat, and the herds that once dotted the plains had moved far north. Food was scarce. The wind carried not only dust but the faint cries of predators searching for prey. He looked back into the cave where Asha nursed their youngest child. The older one, now growing strong, played with a spear carved from a branch, mimicking his father's hunting movements. Korak smiled, but deep inside, unease stirred. He had seen the bones scattered near the dried riverbeds, signs that even the fiercest beasts were dying of thirst. In such times, hunger could make any creature desperate, even human beings. That afternoon, a storm gathered, dark and heavy, but no rain came. Instead, the air filled with the smell of death. Asha noticed it first, the stench of rot, carried on the wind. Korak stood, gripping his spear, and stepped outside the cave. From the distance, he saw movement, not animals, but people. A different tribe, thin and hollow-eyed, approaching slowly. Their leader, an older female with grey streaks in her hair, carried a bundle wrapped in animal hide. Behind her were several others, carrying children too weak to walk. The moment was tense. Korak's people had faced beasts and storms, but never this others of their kind begging for safety. The older female stepped forward and dropped the bundle at his feet. Inside lay dried roots and strips of meat, an offering. Her gesture was simple: peace, in exchange for survival. Korak looked to Asher, whose gaze softened with recognition. She stepped closer and extended her hand toward the strangers, inviting them in. Some of Korak's hunters hesitated, muttering low sounds of warning. More mouths meant less food, more risk. But Korak's mind reached beyond fear. He remembered the time he had shared food with another tribe under the open sky, when peace had saved them. He nodded once, slowly. So the two tribes became one. For the first time, the cave filled with new faces, new voices, and new rhythms of life. The children played together, the hunters shared tools, and the women exchanged knowledge: how to dry roots longer, how to smoke meat to last through dry seasons. They taught each other new ways to survive. It was not always easy. Hunger made tempers short, and sometimes fights broke out. But every time conflict threatened to split them, Asher and the old woman, whose name sounded like Nera, restored peace, reminding them all of what truly mattered. To live together was to be stronger. It was in this crucible of struggle that the tribe's true evolution took shape, not of the body, but of the spirit. They learned to bury their dead near the hills, marking each grave with stones and flowers. It was the first spark of mourning, the realization that those who were gone still mattered, that love could stretch beyond life. They began to watch over the sick and the old, bringing water, shade, and fire to those too weak to move. Compassion, once a flicker, became a flame that no storm could extinguish. One fateful night, however, that compassion would be tested beyond measure. The predators returned. Not the saber-tooth this time, but a pack of dire wolves, large, grey, and cunning. Drawn by the smell of meat, they approached under the veil of darkness. The tribe awoke to the growl of beasts and the terrified cries of children. Flames flickered as shadows danced across the cave walls. Korak leapt to his feet, spear in hand, shouting warnings. The wolves lunged through the narrow entrance, teeth flashing in the firelight. Chaos erupted. The hunters fought desperately, their spears striking through fur and flesh. Asher shielded the children behind a wall of stones, while Nera threw burning sticks toward the beasts. The air filled with smoke, screams, and the primal sound of survival. One wolf broke through the barrier, snapping at the youngest child, but before it could strike, Asher flung herself between them. The beast's fangs tore into her arm, but she did not falter. Korak, roaring like the storm itself, drove his spear into the wolf's side, killing it instantly. Blood and fire mingled on the ground. The remaining wolves, wounded and frightened by the flames, retreated into the darkness. When silence fell again, the cave was heavy with the smell of blood and ash. Asher sat against the wall, her arm torn but her eyes alive. Korak knelt beside her, pressing a strip of hide to her wound. Around them, the children clung to one another, trembling. The others stood still, faces lit by the dying fire. They had won not just the battle, but something far greater. In that moment, Korak understood what all the danger, all the suffering, had been for. Survival was not about killing the strongest enemy or finding the best shelter. It was about this, the circle around the fire, the shared pain, the shared love. Humanity had learned to stand together not because of fear, but because of devotion. Protection was no longer instinct, it was purpose. Days passed. The wounds healed. The wolves never returned. The tribe, once fragile, now thrived with a quiet strength. They moved through the savannah not as prey, but as a force of unity, watching over one another, defending the weak, caring for the old. Asher's scar became a mark of honor, a story told to the children as they stared at the firelight flickering on the cave walls. Years later, when Korak's hair had turned gray and his children had grown to lead hunts of their own, he sat again before the cave, looking out at the horizon. The savanna stretched before him endless, alive, dangerous, beautiful. He could feel the heartbeat of the world beneath his feet. He smiled, knowing that what he and Asher had built would never die. Even when their bones turned to dust, the fire they had kindled, the will to protect, would pass on through generations, shaping all who came after. Above, the stars burned cold and eternal. And perhaps, somewhere among them, the memory of those early hearts still glowed, the first humans who stood against the wild, not just with weapons, but with love. In the great story of time, they were only a flicker, but it was that flicker that became the dawn of humanity.